Shigeru Miyamoto has been making waves in the gaming press recently because of a quote from a discussion with Mother creator Shigesato Itoi about something that is very close to the heart of this channel: Nintendo forecasting. Specifically, how Miyamoto-san forecasts game sales based on his experiences in development and his general expectations for how many hits Nintendo will have and the difficulties with predicting them. I thought it was worth putting his comments into a little bit of context given everything we've turned up on this channel about Nintendo's financial expectations for games. So let's deep dive. Quick shout out to credit sources. I'm pulling directly from the Japanese website Obonichi Techno with an English translation via Google Translate, but I think the original legwork of finding this was via Reset Era Famiboards, and the specific way I saw the precise wording was through Nintendo Prime. Okay, so to set the setting for this interview, Miyamoto-san was chatting with an old friend of his, and he was decked in, what else? A Pikmin t-shirt, and he was in front of a few dozen young people hanging on his every word. So what did he have to say? Miyamoto mentioned that he speaks at new employee seminars every year. So first up, I think this is a vital context for discussing any kind of Nintendo target. Nintendo sets ambitious goals for itself. Heck, any company or organization or person would generally be setting lofty goals in the knowledge that these will not all be met. There is a whole literature on the expectations effect and the power of aspirational targets, which I won't go into here, but in this kind of environment with new Nintendo employees, Shigeru Miyamoto is not going to be soft-shoeing on his expectations. What he says to these new employees is that we are a company supported by hit products. Now that is self-evidently true. How true is it? Well, let's just look at the last fiscal year. In 2023 to 2024, Tears of the Kingdom and Super Mario Bros. Wonder were the best-selling titles. After that, though, the only 23-24 games to cross the 1 million threshold of Nintendo's first-party offerings, let alone 30 million, were Pikmin 4, Super Mario RPG, Princess Peach Showtime, and Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Those games combined sold just over 9 million. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a 7-year-old version of a decade-old game, sold just over 8 million. In fact, out of those 20 million plus selling titles, the medium new game sold just north of 3 million, whereas the median game released in a prior fiscal year sold just over 2 million, and the total sales from the evergreens on this list was around 37 million compared to 43 million from original titles. And this, remember, was in a year with a new 3D Zelda and a new 2D Mario, which have always historically sold absolutely gangbusters and surely skewed these figures to some degree. And sure, with a console in its 8th year, it is natural to expect a few solid sellers, but the fact is that Nintendo's gaming income is heavily supported by these few successes. Plus, of course, a good number of these games are remakes or remasters of prior titles. 30% of the top 20 sellers last financial year had been previously released on other consoles and returned either as a remake of sometimes just various stages like in Mario Party Superstars, or sometimes with a new mode added as with Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and sometimes as with New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe with very little change at all. Needless to say, I'm not mentioning games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which heavily uses mechanics and characters from prior games, but is, notionally at least, new and certainly has lots of new elements, even if one could argue the core of the game is not radically different from previous versions. So then Shigeru Miyamoto says, in that sense, if all our employees think about creating a big hit every day, we'll be fine. Now, I think what's intriguing about this is that it's generally considered almost a badge of honor in some artistic circles to have these niche sleeper hits, cult hits that appeal to a limited audience, and these games can have their place. Fire Emblem titles never take Scrooge McDuck numbers, but they do steady business for a niche audience, and that does have value. But Miyamoto is saying that they are exclusively pursuing big hits every day, and I think that is important. Even with a game like Fire Emblem, you can absolutely see how they will always be looking to see if they can push the game more and more into the mainstream to have a greater and greater appeal without, of course, compromising on what makes the game so beloved in the first place. What does it mean to be a big hit? Well, a big hit needs to have a very broad locus of appeal, and you can see in games like Mario Kart, already successful, the way the game has accessibility modes that really do allow tiny children and aged grandparents to be able to get stuck in alongside competitive pro gamers. Now, as we'll see as we dive later on in this interview, that does not mean that every single game has to be a lowest common denominator Wii Sports clone. In fact, far from it. But let's just move on for now to another aspect of the interview that has caused some consternation among people in the Nintendo community. The 3 to 5 year mark. The idea that Nintendo are looking for a 30 million plus seller roughly every 3 to 5 years has drawn attention. But I think the focus on it is slightly overblown when you put it in its context. So let's have a look at the full context for 30 million selling titles. Since 2000, there have been 9 games that have released and gone on to sell 30 million plus copies. These were New Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo DS, also Wii Sports, Mario Kart Wii, Wii Sports Resort, and New Super Mario Bros. Wii on the, you guessed it, Wii, then Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. The 3DS had no 30 million sellers, and nor, obviously, did the Wii U. The longest gap between 30 million selling game releases was just shy of 8 years between the June 2009 launch of Wii Sports Resort and the April 2017 release of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Still, 9 games in 2 decades is comfortably ahead of the 1 per 3 to 5 years benchmark set by Shigeru Miyamoto. Does this mean, though, that Super Mario Odyssey, with its puny 27.96 million sales as of the last reporting, was a disappointment to Nintendo? What about Tears of the Kingdom, which is still at a measly 20.61 million, and perhaps Pikmin 4 wasn't such a behemoth for the company after all? Look, I think realistically not every game needs to reach 30 million to be a wild success. As I said, that's an aspirational target, and as we'll see later in the interview, it's very much the upper tramline that they're looking for in terms of sales expectation. That said, I think in some cases there was an aspiration for that level which was not in fact achieved. Tears of the Kingdom was clearly phenomenally successful out of the gate, but it's unlikely in the Switch's lifetime to reach 30 million, and even if that was always a tall order for a sequel late in the system's life, Nintendo may feel a little stung that they hoped it would get higher, and yet it seems to be plateauing sales-wise. But of course, if you say 30 million, well, over how long a period are you talking? If they keep selling Tears of the Kingdom through the next console's lifespan, there is an outside shot it could reach 30 million just through selling 1 million a year or so. But you can absolutely guarantee that sooner or later, the game will be remade or remastered or somehow re-released. One way or another, they will recoup their costs on it, and it will bound over that 30 million threshold. Remember, those 30% of game titles that were million plus sellers in the 23 to 24 fiscal year that were also remakes, ports, remasters, or other forms of adaptation of previous game material. But to make a game with the level of scale and ambition of Tears of the Kingdom, they must have had commensurate expectations for the income it could generate. And in this sense, 30 million sales does not seem completely unreasonable, even if it is incredibly ambitious. A rather salutary lesson here is Pokemon, which has coasted along very successfully, with the 20 million mark being hit by its regular games for a long time. Clearly, Nintendo's relationship with the Pokemon Company is a little at arm's length since they do not own the company outright, but it does occur to me that a genuine wish pushed the envelope with Pokemon could see it push 30 million if they really put everything into it. However, from a purely mercenary standpoint, banging out 2 or 3 titles that total around 50 to 60 million in sales in total every 3 years, which is kind of what they've done with Pokemon Legends, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, well, that's almost certainly a better deal than having one massive, original, groundbreaking super title which does break 30 million. Unless that game broke 50-60 million and did Mario Kart 8 numbers, it would not be as sensible a move. So Miyamoto goes on to say that he keeps in mind that 30 million target as he goes about his work, saying, if everyone isn't eagerly searching for something that will be a big hit, then it's going to be overlooked. So I want to make sure that I don't overlook that. I.e., he is determined to ferret out the obscure idea which could be a diamond in the rough. And look, what he means here by a big hit really is simple popularity. What is the next thing that could be a huge craze? I don't necessarily think these are obvious up front in the same way they are in hindsight. Would you have expected Tetris to top column, Zelda to so massively outcompete Mysterious Murasame Castle, or Super Mario Bros. To top Donkey Kong? Maybe, but hindsight, as they say, is 50-50. I think if you went back to the times these games were released, it might be less clear which of them would become evergreen household names and which would simply be niche favourites that never quite went stratospheric. What this approach does is it zones people in on the potential for new discoveries and new ideas. In this sense, I don't think Miyamoto-san is even looking back to those 30 million sellers that were essentially iterating on the most profitable ideas that have gone by. I'm thinking of titles like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and New Super Mario Bros. And of course Wii Sports Resort being another version of Wii Sports. Instead, I suspect he has in mind bold new ideas like the original Wii Sports, or bold reinventions of these franchises like Breath of the Wild. Miyamoto-san goes on to say that he has been giving this speech for about 10 years now to these new Nintendo employees, which is curious as it takes us back to the real dog days of the Wii U, and when the 3DS was still a relatively uncertain proposition just starting to find its feet. I think you can very much see the move to popular games in the vision for the Switch lineup. Breath of the Wild taking the popular open world genre and applying it to Zelda, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a spin on their biggest seller, and Super Mario Odyssey, the biggest Mario yet, were all minted in this period. Now, that's not to say that the Wii U lineup wasn't also conscious of popularity, with New Super Mario Bros. U being another entry in a franchise that had already proved to have two 30 million sellers in the previous decade. But it's that mix of high ambition and demonstrating a little bit of a risk that I think Miyamoto-san is getting at as the interview progresses. By contrast, at this point, Itoi-san says that 1 million units sold does not mean a game is a big hit, although of course not a hit does not mean a failure. Miyamoto said in a previous investors Q&A that 2 million is the kind of number he would expect most games to scoop to be relatively modestly successful, and I expect this number to hold true even if at this moment, due to the large Switch install base, the number for a decent low-key hit is probably closer to 3 or even 4 million. I think it's really interesting that Itoi-san then talks about how Shigeru Miyamoto can eyeball a game and, to use his translated words, assess it on a scale like this one can aim for 30 million copies, or this one will probably sell about 480,000 copies. Now, as a forecasting channel, I thoroughly approve of looking forward, but remember that these are not cast in stone. They are estimates and subject to perpetual change. I think you can see adaptations in some recent games which preserve the integrity of the core concept while trying to find ways to draw people in with the intent of becoming a big, or at least a bigger hit, whether it be the extra story hints in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, or more contained Dandori battles in Pikmin 4, which might appeal to more casual players. I wonder also if the famed battles Yoshiaki Koizumi and Shigeru Miyamoto had over story, with the rich backstory from Galaxy being more or less gutted in Galaxy 2, was less to do with Miyamoto-san being disinterested in narratives by themselves, and more that he thought that narratives in general wouldn't be hugely popular or engaging for casual players. And frankly, I kind of agree. As much as I love a good game narrative in general, there have certainly been games I played where arbitrary narrative is cuddled in and I just find myself hitting the skip button. I just don't play Bomberman for the deep lore. I'm really sorry. if that upsets Bomberman addicts. However, there are some real specifics discussed in this interview as well. Miyamoto-san specifically looks into the case of Wii Fit and talks about how a Japanese survey of demand for a fitness game would say that it's possible the game could sell 6 million, but if the game failed, it could have sold 300,000 units worldwide. So he discussed with Satoru Iwata and looked at the lower and upper sales barriers. Okay, so a failure would be 300,000. The broad expectation based on market research was probably 6 million, and the upper end was, well, completely unknowable. What I feel is implied in this interview, but isn't quite clear from the specific words as translated, is the sense that people might show modest interest in a generic fitness game, but a really strong, bold, original application of that concept, well, that is something that has the potential to be a literal game changer. Itoi-san here talks about how the mood of the early adopters of a piece of software could change things, and Miyamoto-san agrees that it's rather unknowable as to whether something is aiming for 300,000 or 30 million. However experienced he is, however well honed his instincts, ultimately a lot of it comes down to a certain amount of alchemy when these games hit the market. And here I think we need to understand what this 30 million figure truly represents. This is the ceiling for the vast majority of titles and games that are on these systems, and anything close to 30 million is going to really please. That's not to say that the games that don't go anywhere near the failures aren't worth it. In fact, they need some failures because those are the seed corn for the successes. Skyward Sword walked so Breath of the Wild could run, to use just one example, or to adapt a gag from the Nintendo Switch press launch in January 2017, the GameCube had a handle so the Nintendo Switch could become truly portable. Miyamoto's comment in this interview, "You can't try to match the changing ball," feels to me very reminiscent of the legendary Wayne Gretzky quote that you don't want to go where the puck is, you want to go where the puck is going to be. This is not a message about playing it safe, quite the opposite. Miyamoto-san is quoted as saying, "Gee, what can I say? If you're going to do it, swing the bat as hard as you can." The full-throated embrace of wacky concepts like Wii Fit, Nintendogs and Wii Sports show that Nintendo sometimes do go all in, and actually, even in their regular franchises, they will often lean heavily into one particular idea to test it to breaking point. Skyward Sword didn't just dabble in motion controls, but it made them truly central, while Breath of the Wild went very much in a different direction. It didn't just inch towards openness with a few more non-linear dungeons, but tore the rulebook up and started again. Of course, there was some preparatory work, and I've talked in a separate recent video about how Nintendo, for example, uses 2D Zelda games to prototype concepts for its mainline 3D entries, but the core principle here is that only by taking radical risks can radical results be achieved. And of course, while any individual project is highly risky and might fail, the potential of just a tiny number of these to be mega hits more than justifies the risk. The next section of the interview is rather hard to pull apart from Google Translate, and I would be interested to hear what Japanese-speaking Nintendo forecasters make of it. But the gist I get from what is on screen right now is that there is a profit point all games reach, and it does depend on various factors. Over 1 million copies sold, games will generally hit profit, but it depends on what you spend. If you spend 5% or 200% on advertising, it's going to make a big difference. And of course, it's not necessarily clear that the advertising spend will result in significantly higher sales. Clearly, though, many titles do require advertising to push their unique elements. In Japan, Nintendo seemed to spend quite a lot more pushing Pikmin 4 than they did pushing Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And while that is understandable, as many players had played Breath of the Wild and would therefore know at least roughly what to expect from Tears of the Kingdom, that also has to be factored in when you compare the sales success of Tears of the Kingdom compared with Pikmin 4. Yes, Pikmin 4 radically outperformed previous titles, but between the huge advertising push, and the surfeit of marketing endeavours such as Pikmin Bloom and even the decision to re-release Pikmin 3 as Pikmin 3 Deluxe, it did require some considerable cost from Nintendo to get it to the position it is now in. So yes, many titles do require advertising to push their unique elements, and while many Nintendo games do exceed 1 million in sales, most of their very big name games even are in the 2 to 3 million selling range. The only way therefore to guarantee a safety net wide enough for that level of game experimentation is by having the occasional megaton title come in and sell drastically more than the rest. As Miyamoto goes on to say, if you always have the mindset of I want to be a big hit, you will find the seed of it someday. If you try to copy others, you will never hit a home run. He also talks about what Itoi-san dubs the very Nintendo-like idea of a group of normal people doing something different from other people, and indicates that they have the word originality written on the wall of their conference room. So let's summarize these key sections for a minute. 300,000 games sold would be a failure for any release, 1 million would be a modest success or at least a break-even point, but roughly every 3 to 5 years at least, they are hoping for a 30 million plus seller. However, to achieve this, they're focused on innovation, and they acknowledge that there is a huge gulf between the potential appeal of a title and the numbers it might actually do, so they need to keep innovating and experimenting to stay ahead of the market. However, before we wrap up, this is a really fascinating interview, and I want to look at just a couple of other parts right now. Miyamoto talks about the rollercoaster ride of success with consoles since the Famicom, with some being hits and some not, and even within consoles finding inconsistencies. For example, he says, and I quote, "When the Famicom became a huge hit, it went on sale in July and sold really well for about 6 months. And then a year later, the price started to drop in stores and people started to say, the boom is over. But then sales started to pick up again around Christmas, and then things calmed down again the following summer and people started to say, this is finally the end. Then Super Mario Bros. Came out and sold twice as much, and then it continued to sell all over the world. And it's a cycle that has been repeated over and over again." He repeats a common refrain of Satoru Iwata, challenge to expand the gaming population. He also discusses the importance of being calm in the face of success and of being equally calm in the face of hardship. This always reminds me of one of my favourite stories, the Persian myth of King Solomon asking for a sentence for his signet ring that would comfort him in times of sadness and make him reflect in times of joy. He was given a signet ring in which the words were inscribed, "This too shall pass." Of course, philosophically, Nintendo owes far more to Buddhist traditions, but this kind of concept is quite ingrained in Buddhist teaching as well. There is a lot more in this interview, but I may wait until I get a clearer translation, or at least until I can contextualize better some of the statements being made. So for now, I'm going to recommend that you check out the interview link below, and if you've enjoyed this analysis, please do whack the like button, hit subscribe, check out one of these scrumptious videos on screen, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.